did not go off, or whether he intended them to go off. You're saying that the charges that would potentially be leveled against him would be equal.
He won't be charged, obviously, with injuring anybody or with killing anybody. It's possible, based on how they were designed, if they could have activated, that he could be charged with attempted murder and attempted bombing. But it's the same thing. He terrorized the individuals, he terrorized our community, and he put people in harm's way. And as a result, it has to stop. And this is law enforcement did a great job. The varsity team stood up. This guy's off without any challenges. We saw in Austin when they closed in on that bomber. He took a different route. Fortunately, he was the only one injured in that. There was an officer injured. He was the only one who died in that event. But we're fortunate that this isn't somebody that's having a standoff with law enforcement, that he's taken into custody. We can hold him accountable with our system and figure out the why and how with time, with a little bit of sigh of relief for everyone around the country.
You make some excellent points, Dan.
Stop worrying about their mail.
Yeah, one last question. Catherine Herridge said the cameras at a self-serve kiosk in Florida may have been critical in the end. You have to think there were a lot of cameras there.
There's a lot of cameras there. They were critical in the Austin case. CCTV is critical in most of these investigations. There's also a huge digital footprint that the authorities have the ability to look at, especially when we get a narrow area where we believe a suspect's in. There's probably so much evidence here that it was overwhelming.
Wow. It's amazing that, here we are. We have to learn more. We know the suspect's in custody. We don't know if there's more people involved. All of that, obviously, are going to be the details and the facts that will come out here with the DOJ holding a news conference a couple hours from now. Dan Linsky, thank you.
So let's get to New York. Republican Peter King, member of the House Homeland Security Committee. Sir, hello to you. We've been watching the NYPD do yeoman's work yet again. What's your observation now that it appears at least one person is in custody?
Yeah, it's certainly, first of all, it's obvious they did a great job, and apparently this is the person. They wouldn't be making this type of announcement, having this type of operation, if they weren't 99.9% convinced that he is the person, or she, I assume it's a he. And again, the NYPD, FBI, law enforcement everywhere did a phenomenal job on this, and I really give the American people and the media and law enforcement credit. No one panicked here. They kept their eye on the ball. And I thought it was very impressive, watching the people in New York City, just walking by as things were happening, realizing that all you can do now is leave it up to law enforcement, leave it up to the NYPD and the FBI, and they would get the job done. And it was almost inevitable this person would be caught with all the technology that's available today. And there were so many telltale signs he left behind. But again, there could have been a disaster. And thank God for law enforcement. They did a great job and always do.
As Rick Leventhal reports that this man has been wanted for prior arrests and has been known to make threats toward judges, et cetera, in Florida, perhaps in other states. We don't know yet, but we'll see if it plays out that way. Right. If that's the case, they've been watching him for 24 hours. I think we can emphasize yet again what that shows is, in the end, there's not a whole lot of surprises here. When you find someone who is reaching out in the way this person has, with a total of 12 so far packages.
Yeah, again, though, to give law enforcement credit, sometimes it looks easier after the fact. The fact that they were able to piece all this together, the fact that they were able to find him. There's a lot of people in the country that are on terrorist lists or have been arrested for terrorist-type charges in the past, and the fact they were able to zero in on him and tie it all together, again, shows how effective law enforcement is and how well coordinated it is today, how the various departments and agencies deal with each other, state, federal, local, interstate. It's just, again, this is a great victory for law enforcement, and thank God no one was wounded. Whether or not he intended these bombs to go off, anytime you're playing with explosives, anything can happen. So it appears that this really is ending well.
Just because a suspect is in custody now doesn't necessarily mean there aren't more of these devices out there. If he wasn't planning on being caught and taken into custody today, we could still find out that there's several more, a dozen more. We don't know.
Yeah, and I assume they're trying to find that now. That's one of the reasons why they're going to his house, why they have the search warrant. They're probably going through all his records to see if, and also going through all other cameras, closed-circuit cameras, to see any other locations he may have been at, and try to track this down as much as they can. So, no, you're right. It's not over. It's over to the extent that it seems they've gotten their man. But on the other hand, you're right. There could be others out there, and it will probably be a day or two before we know for certain what the status is. So, But again, I think it would be easier now knowing where they're coming from and what to be looking for. So,
Yeah.
but no, you're right, Sandra. This is not, it's over, but it's not over.
Peter King, thank you. Stand on by. I mean, the evidence that's coming in right now, apparently a camera picked up at a self-serve kiosk in Florida was a major part of this investigation. Yesterday, the focus went to Florida. We knew that from the various reporting across the country. They've been watching now, according to Rick Leventhal, the suspect, a male in his 50s, for the past 24 hours, and his van is now being confiscated, and we don't know what else. Peter King, thank you for that. I want to get to Sandra now for more.
Thank you to the Congressman.
Thank you.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us now. He's got new information. John?
And Sandra, good morning to you. We do know that the Department of Justice is going to be holding a press conference 2:30 this afternoon to talk more about this. The White House has been watching this very closely. Sarah Huckabee Sanders with a statement just a little while ago saying the president is receiving constant information as it is available. The president said the other day that he was going to bring the full force and weight of the federal government down on top of this investigation. He has so far stayed away from it politically in his campaign appearance in Mosinee, Wisconsin the other night, really kind of dialing it back, saying that the country has to stick together in cases like this. We need to elevate the degree of civility with which we treat each other and condemn in all forms political violence. But the president also, with an interesting tweet about all of this just a short time ago, in which he said, quote, Republicans are doing so well in early voting and at the polls, and now this, quote, bomb stuff happens, and the momentum greatly slows. News not talking politics. Very unfortunate what's going on. Republicans go out and vote. I mean, there's no shortage of people who are floating theories that this might have been designed to take some of the more powerful Republican issues out of the news. And what the president is saying there in that tweet might seem to go to that particular angle. So we'll wait and see what the Justice Department has to say this afternoon. But clearly, the president has known what's been going on for some time now. And I'm not saying that his tweet was based on what he knows, but it does sort of raise some interesting questions here about what the president knows and what he's tweeting on Twitter. And are those things somehow connected, Sandra?
John Roberts from the White House. Things quickly changing. A suspect has been taken into custody in Florida. The breaking news continues. John Roberts, thank you.
Geographically, Plantation, Florida, just west of Fort Lauderdale, north of Miami, clearly, and right next to the community of Sunrise, Florida, which is where the home office is for Debbie Wasserman Schultz in that part of the country. We're told what you're looking at here with that van covered in the blue tarp is near an auto zone around State Route 7 in southeastern Florida. So when we get a better sense of what that neighborhood's about, we'll pass it to you. Fred Burton, former counterterrorism agent, State Department, also chief security officer for Stratfor in Austin, Texas. Fred, you've been a great source of information for us with excellent perspective when you consider you dealt with a mail bomber this past year in March in Austin, Texas. What do you make so far of 2 more packages found earlier today? That brings the total at the moment to 12, and apparently at least 1 suspect now has been apprehended.
Well, Bill, first, thank you for those very kind comments. As we discussed yesterday, I'm not surprised in the least that the suspect has been picked up. He was probably under surveillance as of yesterday. It didn't take long once they had that mail facility identified, and it's a matter then of just going through the CCTV footage and then doing some cell phone tower triangulation and narrow in on some suspects. So good job by law enforcement to rapidly resolve this issue.
Okay, Fred, when you think about the tactics here, do you draw any conclusions from this suspect when you consider that none of these devices went off?
Well, I put this kind of suspect in the same boat that I would. You may recall from about 2008 to 2014, we had a white powder hoax suspect that was picked up in Texas, and he was doing the same thing, mailing these letters to high-value targets to include the president and so forth, members of Congress. So when you look at this kind of disruption that can be caused, there really is a weapon of mass panic that you can initiate by making one of these kinds of events take place.
Interesting there. When you think also about the fact that all these packages were intact, that had to be a great source and a great wealth of information for investigators. But what Catherine Harris told us about 20 minutes ago, that the cameras at a self-serve kiosk at a post office in Florida might have been the one indicator that investigators need to put an identity on this man.
Just like the Austin bomber, the case was unraveled the same way when the individual walked into the facility to mail a package. The technology today, combined with just good old-fashioned detective work, gives the government the leverage to be able to rapidly resolve this kind of case.
Fred, thank you. Stand by, okay? In Austin, Texas, Fred Burton, watching this from afar with a lot of experience just in the past year in dealing with this. State Route 441 in Plantation, Florida is what we're looking at here. Screen left with a blue tarp on this van. A lot of stickers on the side of that van, too. What they say is not clear just yet. Might give us a few clues about what this person's all about.
Now that there's a suspect in custody, you heard Pete King say if they've arrested this person, they are sure that this is the guy. We're learning it's a male. He's a male in his 50s in Florida resident, formerly of New York. Ron Haskell's former FBI assistant director, and he joins us now. Ron, we continue to wait more details. The DOJ will have a presser in the 2 o'clock hour Eastern time. What do you think of what we know so far?
I can't say I'm too surprised. I think there have been a couple of big pieces of this story so far. One is the forensics piece with these 12 devices being analyzed. One of the pieces the CCTV, the cameras surrounding relevant places that give law enforcement an opportunity. The other, I think, has been the threat piece. The Secret Service, the FBI, U.S. Capitol Police, and local police all have holdings that include threatening communications, subjects who've been charged in the past, evidence of those communications, that I think that all those organizations have been looking at vigorously. Presumably something in those three streams has come together, coalesced around an individual. So not too surprising that that somebody's now in custody.
We're looking at these live images in Florida where obviously everyone is going to want to know who this person is, where they come from, their motivation. This has been a difficult few days considering you've got the FBI, you've got federal, state, local authorities all over this, Secret Service, and there have been very few details to come out. How quickly do you think we are going to know more about this suspect, Ron?
Well, I think we're going to know more before the press conference comes out who we're talking about. There are some emanations that are coming out that now we know that somebody's under arrest. We see the helicopter hovering over a scene. So I think there are bits and pieces that are going to come out. It could be we know this person's identity and what their criminal past has been before DOJ says anything to us at 2 o'clock. So,
and this hasn't been confirmed by the DOJ, but what our own Rick Leventhal has confirmed via law enforcement officials. The suspect, as I said, Florida resident, formerly New Yorker, male, white male in his 50s. He's told around 56 years old, lives in North Miami Beach, and prior arrests were made. He was talking about the background of the suspect, Ron, and what he has learned is that there were prior arrests made for terrorist threats, so he was known to law enforcement. Obviously, that would have helped them with this search.
Well, it would, because if we know the nature of the threats and the type of communications that he's been convicted of or arrested for in the past, that's helpful. The other helpful thing is his fingerprints will be on file, so it adds value to the work that's being done in Quantico. If you have a bunch of devices and no fingerprints of somebody on file to compare it to, they may be developing fingerprints, but if they have nobody to compare it to, that makes the law enforcement job harder. If they have DNA on file, if they have fingerprints on file, and there's DNA and fingerprints in these packages or on these packages, on these devices, and you have somebody to compare it to, and you get a hit, boy, that's gold for the investigators.
As far as further potential devices, that is a continued threat, right, Ron? I mean, we don't know if there's more out there.
Yeah, look, if they are taking somebody into custody, one of the early goals of the ongoing investigation will be to Mirandize him if he's going to be charged and start to ask him some questions so that they can understand, look, 15 packages were mailed, 20 packages were mailed, who were they mailed to, so they can put out the alert. We have to, and we heard the police commissioner talk about it the other day, consider these as potentially destructive devices. And so stopping those threats from reaching a target, stopping those threats from reaching a postal carrier who might potentially drop or detonate a device accidentally, that's going to be an important goal in the next couple of hours here. So that's the FBI understands that risk, and they will be certainly pushing on this subject for statements.
Not to mention, Ron, we are days away from a midterm election. You know, and the heightened security anyway, and now as a result of this, I mean, it is something to think about that large-scale post office on 52nd Street being completely evacuated this morning because of that 12th discovered device. I mean, when you talk about the scare level, the threat, the fear that this has brought on to the American people, I mean, it stopped commerce.
Sure, very, very disruptive, very worrisome for the public who is coming to a tourist location or just trying to get to work and do their job. There's going to be a price to be paid. Fortunately here, I mean, we're heartened by the fact that nobody's been hurt so far. There would be sentencing enhancements if somebody were to be hurt. If one of these devices were to detonate, there would be sentencing enhancements, but the penalty is going to be severe based on what's happened already.
Yeah, Ron, just reading from the Sun Sentinel, that's the main newspaper there in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. They're saying this is a commercial parking lot where this van has now been covered and towed away. It also says the following, just reading from their website for the newspaper, FBI agents, law enforcement officers examining a white van in a commercial parking lot covered with pro-Trump stickers. Then they covered the van with a blue tarp and we're getting ready to load it on a truck, which is what we have been watching here. So they're going to put all this together and look at his history and see what we have here there in South Florida. Last comment on that, Ron, then we're going to go to our next guest.
Yeah, I think that this arrest may deflate some of the alternate theories that have been bouncing around out there on who this person is. This may be what a lot of folks have suspected, the obvious, somebody who's angry, somebody who's very pro-Trump, somebody who may have an axe to grind with Debbie Wasserman Schultz. All of that may be coming back to what appears to be maybe an obvious subject.
Ron, thank you. Terrific information. Ron Husko there with the analysis. Want to bring in Kansas Republican Congressman Kevin Yoder with us now. And, sir, you're in a re-election battle yourself 11 days from now. Kudos to law enforcement. It appears, at the moment, job well done.
Yeah, that's right. The Joint Terrorism Task Force, made up of the FBI, the U.S. Secret Service, ATF, the Mail Inspection Service, they've been working around the clock trying to catch this perpetrator that started earlier this week. We've got the 12th alleged package found this morning. And to find that we were finally captured this guy down in Florida, I think it brings a relief to the folks, serving in office, news agencies. I mean, the amount of folks that are being targeted here, our heart goes out to them, whether you're Republican or Democrat. This is despicable, these domestic acts of terrorism. And so we've had the Joint Terrorism Task Force working around the clock. I talked to the director of the Secret Service yesterday. They were confident that they were bearing down on the perpetrator and that the more packages he was sending, the easier it was going to make it for them to ultimately catch him.
Yeah, sir, I'm just reading a tweet from the White House West Wing. The president says this: I will be speaking at the Young Black Leadership Summit in 15 minutes, where I will address the investigation into the bomb packages. We've seen a live picture from inside the White House, and when he comes to the microphone, we'll bring that to our viewers. The other information you have there is that you've been in touch with law enforcement through this. What else were they telling you as this investigation unfolded? Sir?
Well, they weren't really revealing a lot of the information because, of course, they didn't want to tip off the potential suspect that they were, working towards apprehending him. But certainly that they felt that there was a lot of evidence that was being compiled based upon the magnitude or the multitude of packages that had been sent. And so clearly he's left a trail here. And I know that the Secret Service director and others that were working on this had the full effort of law enforcement. They badly wanted to find this man and make sure that he was arrested. As you were mentioning earlier on the program, the terror that this has been infecting, the American people with, whether it's mail facilities or congressional offices or, media buildings, this is something that we had to find quickly and put a stop to. And so I think we're all somewhat relieved that we found this gentleman that this awful individual and bringing him to justice. Suspect, yeah, and we're going to try to bring him to justice.
Last question from me on this. The president tweeted about an hour ago that this story had been distracting voters, and he even suggested that the early voting returns have been very good for Republicans. Do you think that this has been a distraction of sorts?
Well, I think it's been more than anything, I think it's been a horrible chapter in politics in which someone has been, alleged suspect's been sending packages to elected officials, scaring them and their families and their coworkers. And so more than anything, we were just focused on how we bring justice here, how we stop these packages from being sent. And so certainly 11 days left in the election, there are a lot of important issues, but this sort of went beyond the election and was more going to the heart of keeping people safe and bringing domestic terrorists to justice.
You're in one of these toss-up districts, suburbs of Kansas City, et cetera. What have your constituents been saying about this? How have they been viewing this from Middle America?
Well, I think they see this as the further angering of American politics. People on both sides are very angry about the political discourse in this country. I'm someone who's been trying to really lead on that. I co-chair the Civility Caucus with a Democratic colleague from the state of Missouri. We try to bring Congress together. When the shooting happened in Washington, D.C. last year, where members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, were shot at, we took that horrible tragedy and the attack on Steve Scalise in particular and used that as a moment to try to bring this country together. That anybody in either political party that has any sort of political axe to grind, we cannot let these angry words, this caustic political atmosphere turn into violence. And that's what we're seeing, with these packages being sent, and that's what we saw last year in that baseball field. So I don't think that this violence knows political boundaries. It doesn't know Republicans and Democrats. It can strike either way, and that's why we all must be unified in speaking out against it.
Kevin Yoder, thank you. The Republican Congressional District number 3 in Kansas. Sir, thank you for your time and your commentary on this as we watch yet another slow drive, Sandra, the fourth one so far this week.
Meanwhile, we are awaiting the president now. He was expected to address the Young Black Leadership Summit today at this time, and he has now just tweeted out he will address the investigation into the bomb packages. So we are now awaiting the president to speak live at the White House. We'll certainly want to hear his reaction. Bill Daley is former FBI investigator. He joins us by phone now. Bill, as we await the president and we see yet another device carried off, what is your thoughts? Is this suspect, said to be a male in his 50s, is now in custody?
Well, first of all, Sandra, I'm highly confident that they've gotten the man. They've got the individual responsible. And at least certainly on the first blush of this, it seems like, it's an individual. If there are any other people who either had knowledge of or in any way complicit, they'll quickly get to those individuals. I know today there were a couple of other packages identified through the mail system, but I think as many authorities said, they kind of expected that there could be some more still in that process and yet to be either delivered or uncovered. So I don't think those are necessarily new per se. I think that all these were probably sent in around the same time as they're suggesting emanated from Florida. And the good news is they have their man, and this episode should be stopped now.
This on a day when we learned about 2 more suspicious packages, one in Florida, one in New York City, which was already carried off up to the facility for investigation up there of similar likeness to the other devices that were found. We're also just learning that a DHS official traveling with Kirstjen Nielsen saying that the person under arrest does not have ties to international terrorism. They are ruling that out. She is expected to address this person in custody when she speaks in the 12 o'clock hour. But we're awaiting the president now. And Bill, I can imagine the president is going to heap a lot of praise on law enforcement officials, the FBI, Secret Service, for everything that they have done to this point in what appears to be an incredibly timely manner in bringing this suspect in and finding out now what we all await was what was his motivation.
Yeah, and Sandra, I would say is that certainly great compliments to all the police agencies who have been part of this effort. from local, state, and federal level, the Joint Terrorism Task Forces that were involved in this process and still are to this moment. I mean, it's not completely wrapped up. They still have to go through, I think, as you've been displaying some pictures of a van and perhaps there's residence or locations where this individual has been. There may be other explosive materials that he's left behind that are dangerous to other citizens. So, this is certainly not completely behind us, kind of wrapped up as we like on a made-for-TV movie. It continues on. But, yes, I think you're right. It's a very positive day for a number of aspects. One, that they were caught in the system and that people were not injured, whether or not those had timing devices or whatever the speculation is, but they were devices. So no one was hurt because of the good processes in place by government as well as corporate citizens who have mailroom and other procedures in place to identify and thwart these type of devices. And the other is as I said, the extensive cooperation between law enforcement agencies. The FBI had approximately 24 different teams working on this in concert with the Joint Terrorism Task Forces in the various locations. And I think today we have to be very proud of the way they all work together. And I think it's a good time, certainly for the FBI as well, in light of some things that have been going on over the past few months.
So, Bill Daley, thank you very much for jumping on the breaking news for us. We're awaiting a few things at this moment. The president is expected to speak at the White House any moment now. Also, DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, she's down at the border. She's expected to make comments on this arrest. And also Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the DOJ first to confirm this, and he will likely be making comments shortly on this as well.
So we're piecing it together. Catherine Herridge rejoins our coverage now. And Catherine, past 30 minutes or so, what more have you learned?
Well, things are moving very quickly. I would say that based on conversations I was having last evening, my contacts were saying the FBI was being very close-lipped about the location inside the United States that they were focused on. And my contacts believe that this was another indicator that they were getting very close to moving in on an individual or individuals. And then we had the developments this morning. Just to recap, the suspect has been identified to Fox News as a white male in his 50s, former New Yorker now residing in Florida, and someone who has a prior history with law enforcement, who's known to them, has a history of what are called terroristic threats. I want to just drill down on that for a moment so people understand what that really involves. Terroristic threats under the law means that you are threatening to commit an act of violence against an individual or physical property. And it also can include threats designed to influence a branch of government or politics. So I'm going to be paying close attention to that as we wait to hear from the President, the Justice Department, and the Homeland Security Secretary. I'd also add that a number of pieces of forensic evidence have really risen to the surface in the last couple of days as important. We've been talking on your show and others here on Fox about the wealth of forensic evidence due to the fact that these devices did not explode. I don't want to minimize this idea that the devices were not dangerous. I was specifically told that some of them were so unstable that they opted to detonate and destroy them rather than transport them down to Quantico, Virginia, which is the main FBI lab that's doing the forensics review. I was also told that based on the evidence, things had moved so quickly that the FBI, as of yesterday, was reaching out to different retailers to try and pinpoint and track down the elements of the package bombs, so things like the pipes, the gunpowder, the plastic taping, also the manila envelopes. All of these things can often be tracked back to a manufacturer and then also even point of sale or point of origin, if you will. So again, things moving very quickly, really in a 72, 96-hour period. But I would caution that the lesson from this morning is that still more packages may be out there. We had the 2 that were recovered today, and I've seen some reporting and had some information that there may in fact be another one that's being a possible package that's being investigated at this hour.
That's interesting. The last time we spoke, you talked about a camera at a self-serve kiosk in Florida. What more information do you have on that camera?
Well, I don't want to speculate too much, but what I know is that when they went into that postal facility, they were looking at security camera footage. And if you've been into a postal facility recently, you know that they often have the self-service kiosks. And the reporting is that they look particularly, at that to see who had been using that kiosk in that U.S. postal facility. And if you just kind of walk back through the timing, if you know someone's using a postal facility at a certain time that's of interest to you, then you can trace back to neighboring businesses and also look at their CCTV footage to kind of build this mosaic of images to understand who the individual might be. But putting all of that in context, what we know from the reporting of Rick Leventhal this morning is that this individual was already known to law enforcement, which gave them a big leg up in effecting this arrest.
And just taking a guess here, based on some of the reporting in Southeast Florida, out of Fort Lauderdale and out of Miami, this van was not parked in a place where this individual lives. It was at another location, but not too far from Sunrise, Florida, which is where Debbie Wasserman Schultz's home offices are for that district.
Right. So sort of as a point of interest, we talk a lot about a forensic review, and we focus on things like physical elements, so a manila envelope and the pipes used in the pipe bombs. But there's another type of profiling that goes on, which is called geographic profiling. So you take different data points about where the packages were processed, at what point they were delivered, and you look at that sort of across the country, and you triangulate that information with an algorithm, and you can start to look at the likely places where the person is operating out of. Do you see what I'm getting at there?
I certainly do.
Okay.
Yeah,
so we talk about physical profiling, but there's also something called geographic profiling.
Just go to Google Maps and just look at the locations we've talked about already today. Sunrise, Florida, Plantation, Florida, Aventura, Florida. Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Sandra.
We continue to look at these live pictures of the suspect's van being hauled off. This as we await the president. He is expected to speak any moment now. As we await him, also the Department of Justice holding a press conference later today. Also, Kirstjen Nielsen, the DHS secretary, says she will be commenting on this arrest shortly as well. As we await all of that, let's bring in Rick Leventhal. Rick, what more are you learning?
Well, Sandra, we have a photo and an identity of a possible suspect in this case. We're not showing it yet because we haven't triple confirmed that it is in fact the guy. But if this is his van, then he was clearly hiding in plain sight. If you saw all the bumper stickers on it, the stickers in the windows, this is someone, again, who was known to law enforcement, and a prior criminal history, a long prior criminal history, would have helped narrow the search very greatly for law enforcement. They know what area he's in. They look at Florida, they look at South Florida, and then they look at who's in that area who might fit the profile of someone who would do something like this. And a guy like this with this many priors and this kind of display on a van in a public place would potentially help them to narrow it down and then try to see whether or not any of the evidence that they've collected can, in fact, be linked to this person. Of course, the FBI's evidence response team is among the best in the world at doing what they do. They have forensics investigators that can take the smallest speck and turn it into real evidence, and that's what they've been doing since they found that first attempted bomb at George Soros's house earlier this week. And the other issue here is that it appears to me that this is not a sophisticated bomb maker. If you're going to send out a dozen or more pipe bomb suspected explosive devices, and none of them not only don't detonate, but they don't even smoke. Some of them apparently didn't even have trigger mechanisms. This is someone who was looking perhaps to scare or spread fear or send a message, but it doesn't appear to be someone who actually was trying to blow anything up, because he did a poor job if that was the case. Well, but again, what we know is that this is a guy, apparently according to law enforcement sources, who was 56, known to law enforcement, lived in South Florida, is from New York, and had prior arrests for terroristic threats. And
some of those threats, Rick, you were telling us 30 minutes ago, this is the type of threat you would find when a resident or an individual is threatening a local judge or a court. Were you able to get more specifics on that?
No, only that he fits a profile of the kind of guy that you've seen and heard about before, who's always, out there complaining about one thing or another, and then takes it to the next level and actually starts making threats against people in public,
Understood.
in the public forum who he has issues with. And apparently this guy was arrested for those kinds of threats. And of course, we'll learn more as the day progresses on exactly what he was accused of doing.
Did you just hear Catherine Herridge talk about the geographical profiling?
Yeah.
When you talk to investigators in New York, how does that fit into the job they do? Because that may be critical in the end here to finding this guy.
Well, I mean, listen, any single thing that they can collect, any piece of evidence, any envelope, any stamp, any element from those devices that were sent out can be traced to a source. And if they can trace elements that were collected to a single source, and if those sources all appear to be from the same geographical area, then of course, yeah, they're narrowing it down. And now they're looking at South Florida, they're looking at Plantation, or they're looking at Aventura or Fort Lauderdale or wherever these pieces lead them to, and then they can sort of look in that area and say, okay, what people in this area are known to us who might do something like this? And that helps them greatly in then trying to link the evidence they've collected to a potential suspect. And they did quick work. They were watching this guy, Bill, I'm told, for at least a day, maybe longer. Okay. And now they've taken him into custody.
Known to authorities, that certainly had to have helped. Rick Leventhal, thank you for your reporting on this. As we watch that vehicle go away, we're going to learn a lot more here soon, hear from the president, obviously, and a coast-to-coast investigation has come to this moment.
Yeah, Catherine Herridge also referenced one thing a moment ago, too, about the fact that there could be more packages out there. There's some reporting that one has shown up in Northern California. We haven't confirmed that, have not tracked that down, but it's still possible that we could get more information on that throughout the day. But the president speaks at noon from the White House. We'll have that live for you in a matter of moments here. And then at 2:30, the Department of Justice, and we should see Jeff Sessions and others come out at that point. And you mentioned Kirstjen Nielsen. She's on the southern border, California, and she's going to have some commentary as well come up in the next hour or two. So we'll be all over that.
We'll look forward to all that. That's it for us from America's Newsroom. Thank you for joining us. The breaking news continues on Outnumbered right now.
Fox News alert: President Trump will address the investigation into the mail bombs just moments from now. As Fox News confirms, the man has been arrested in Florida in connection to those devices. 2 more devices were found today, one in New York City addressed to former DNI James Clapper, and one in Florida addressed to New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. Catherine Herridge is live in Washington, D.C. right now with more as we watch the van of the suspect. That's what you're seeing on your screen there. It is being taken away to be examined, and we wait for the president. You see that above us there on the screen. Catherine, what do you have?
Thanks, Melissa. It's been very fluid and moving quickly this morning. About an hour ago, we confirmed here at Fox News that a male suspect had been arrested in Florida in connection to the dozen suspicious packages sent to different parts of the United States. We also understand that they are considering whether other individuals were involved, but at this point, the single arrest and the van you see there on the left, we believe belongs to the individual and has been now, as you can see from the blue tarp, sort of almost wrapped as evidence to take for further investigation. We're told through the reporting of my colleague, Rick Leventhal, that the individual had lived in the New York City area, is in his 50s, but more recently was living in Florida and was already known to federal authorities and law enforcement authorities for prior terroristic threats. Terroristic threats under the law are threats to commit an act of violence against an individual, individuals, or property, and it can also encompass threats of a political nature to influence a branch of government. So that's something to be watching for when we hear from the Attorney General about 2.5 hours from now. Now that we look back on the last 12 hours, it seems clear that the FBI investigation was moving very quickly and very aggressively. Some of our contacts here at Fox News said that the Bureau was being a little cagey and sort of tight-lipped about the geographic location they were focused on with the bomber, but we knew from our own reporting that Florida had become an area of interest, and after that there was a search of a postal facility just outside of Miami, or the Miami suburbs, and there was a particular attention played to, as you would expect, security camera video at these self-service kiosks, and then also CCTV footage at surrounding businesses as well. Just to not draw too fine a line under it, We've known through our reporting in the last 72 hours that there really has been a wealth of forensic evidence that was available to the FBI, and that has certainly facilitated this investigation. We were told this morning that it had advanced to the point where the FBI was reaching out to retailers to determine the point of purchase for elements of these suspicious packages. So things like the manila envelope, also the pipes, also the explosive powder that was inside. Finally, what I would say is that there's been reporting sort of across the spectrum as to how dangerous these devices may or may not have been. I was told that some of the devices were considered so dangerous and unstable. That's the key phrase here, unstable, that they were detonated and destroyed rather than transported to Quantico, Virginia, which is where that's really the hub for the forensic analysis in this case, Melissa.
Catherine, thank you so much for that. So we understand that we're going to hear from the president in a short time. Are they going to reveal the identity of this man? Do you have any idea?
Well, I don't want to sort of speculate for folks at home, but typically the identification of the suspect would come from the Attorney General or the FBI Director, and we are expecting a news conference at the Justice Department just a couple of hours from now. That's not to say we couldn't get an identification from the president, but that wouldn't be typically how it's done. It would usually be done by the Justice Department branch or arm of government, if you will. And the president could speak to the larger issues, as he has throughout the week, about securing the country, also finding out who or what was responsible, and bringing the full force of the U.S. justice system to bear on that individual or individuals.
The president has tweeted, he says, I will be speaking at the Young Black Leadership Summit in 15 minutes, where I will address the investigation into the bomb packages. So we know that that's coming up in just the next short few minutes, because that wasn't that long ago. Catherine, you mentioned something that was the first time that we've heard some detail about this, you know, because people have asked, well, why didn't the packages explode? Thank the good Lord they didn't. You're talking, though, about some of them being so unstable that they felt like they couldn't get to Quantico with them. That's an important and interesting detail.
The information has been sort of shifting a lot this week, and I think that's a reflection of how quickly the investigation has been moving. You never really have a totally complete picture, but the latest information I had this morning is that some of the devices were considered very dangerous and unstable. That's the key descriptor there, unstable, that they were detonated rather than transported to Quantico, Virginia.
So what does unstable mean to you? Because, you know, we heard Rick Leventhal say that a couple of them didn't have triggering devices. It just means that the powder and stuff included to be frightening, you know, could with static electricity or something else blow up on its own?
Again, I don't want to speculate because it's just too serious a discussion to do that. But the description that I was given was unstable.
Okay.
All right. Catherine, you know, yesterday when you were reporting with us on Outnumbered and Overtime, you were just starting to learn that authorities were zeroing in on certain parts of the country. And then later in the day, we saw an arrival of the feds and that unit, that anti-terrorism unit, we were learning might include NYPD. And then, of course, we saw today that it did. And maybe the connection might have been that this man had lived in New York and whatever it was. But as you were learning, as this was zeroing in, was Florida one of the places even early on?
Based on information I was able to obtain along with our producer Bill Mears, we were told that Florida it was described to us as a region of interest. That in some ways on its face is pretty self-explanatory when you look at the big picture here, because a number of the devices I don't want to say originated, but I'm going to say at that point what we knew is that they were coming to addresses in Florida, and then of course the return address was this misspelling of Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Remember the device that was sent to former Attorney General Eric Holder failed to be delivered because the address was not correct, or it just wasn't the right address for him, so it went back to Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz's office, and that's when it was flagged. So we thought we had two packages, but in fact there was one. Though on this point of Florida, we've talked a bit about forensic profiling based on the evidence, and an individual, but there's also something called geographic profiling. I was talking about it last hour, which is when you have different data points, so you know how many packages you have, you know geographically how they spread across the United States. You also know the timing of when they've been discovered, and you can work back in some cases when they were processed through postal facilities. And you can triangulate that information using algorithms, and you can start to see areas where the suspect or suspects were likely operating out of in order to get the packages to all those destinations with the time frame that you've been able to identify. So you can triangulate that information down into areas where you can really start to drill down. But I think one of the things that we may find out today is that this investigation was really moving at a lightning pace because of a number of factors, not just the evidence, not just what they were able to process, what they saw from CCTV, but now Rick Leventhal's information about this person being known to them. That's a huge leg up in any investigation.
Well, and I had been reading about the mail center that they were focused in on late yesterday into today. It handles hundreds of thousands of packages a day, and you know they were looking at that as well in terms of that original or origin-based information that they might get. Not saying that they all came from there, but they were looking for that. Plantation, Florida, is where we are watching this. Catherine Herridge is along with breaking news for us. And Catherine, before I let you go, what we can see on the left-hand side of the screen live is a tarped van. And it was taken from the premises of this suspect, this 56-year-old man. We don't know his name yet. Could learn that from the authorities coming up. The president set to speak within a short few minutes here, we're told. He lived in South Florida. What more do we know, or what more are we gathering at this point about anything on the premises, about him, about anything connected to him?
Well, I just want to stick with, I think, what we can say with confidence is that they're treating that van or that vehicle like crime scene evidence, right? What you want to be able to do in this situation is determine whether he was building these devices in his home, maybe in his van, and whether he had any kind of assist from other individuals, either knowingly or unknowingly. So one of the reasons they secure the van is if you think of it like a murder scene, if you will, you want to have everything intact because you want to be able to have, number one, an effective chain of evidence for any prosecution. Number two, you're going to want to see whether if any of the devices were moved in that vehicle. Number three, whether any of the devices were even constructed in that vehicle, right? And whether you're finding DNA of others which can be explained away because of just you know, contact that he's having with other individuals as opposed to individuals who were in some way part of wittingly or unwittingly in putting the devices together. So again, this is like taking a piece of evidence from a crime scene. It just happens to be a huge piece of evidence. It's a vehicle.
Yeah. One law enforcement official described to me yesterday that the bombs themselves, anything that this individual would have touched, would be a, quote, forensics bonanza. Catherine Herridge, as always, leaning on you for great reporting today. We'll bring you back as you learn more. Thank you very much. I want to open it up out to the couch now. Steve Rogers is here. Steve, you worked in counterintelligence in the state of New Jersey, and you have been with us on many occasions, unfortunately, for these things. Today, though, good news. None of these devices has exploded. No injuries at all. And they have a suspect in all of this.
Yes, and I'll build a little timeline for you. President Trump's quick decision to mobilize the full weight of the U.S. government's law enforcement agencies resulted in what we have today, and I'll tell you why. He mobilized the ATF, the FBI, military intelligence agencies, local, state, and county law enforcement. So when Catherine Harris said it was a rapid response, and very rapid, all these agencies were brought together, and all of these experts were able to use their skills and talents to bring where we are today.
I know that you were a member of the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. That's one of the reasons that we always bring you on in these situations and talk to you about this. And you have a lot of insight. Looking at what we know so far in terms of the devices, seeing the van being driven away, do you think that there's one person behind this, or what does it, could one person have done all this? What's the likely profile generally?
I believe that this is one person. I believe that because of the quickness of these devices that were mailed. He could have had them piled up, and every day mail one, mail another, and just a crazed individual who decided to take this action for whatever reason. And believe me, the motive is going to be very important. Police are going to try to find the motive from this individual, but I believe it's one person. And by the way, they're rudimentary devices. They were never meant to blow up. It was meant to instill fear into all of us.
But the new reporting from Catherine is that they were dangerous and unstable. So
Yeah,
maybe but they could blow up, I guess is the point.
Well, always err on the side of caution. If the law enforcement agents that were on the scene believe that there's a possibility that something could happen, let's err on the side of safety. So that's why they say it was unstable.
All right. We are all checking our devices right now. We are still working to confirm, always most comfortable with 3 sources, but we've got 2 on the name. Second federal source identifying suspected arrested as Cesar Sayoc of Aventura, Florida. Melissa, as we look at this, and you and I have been looking at notes for about an hour now because they've been coming in. We've been waiting for a triangulation of confirmation. But this is a source, a singular source close to the White House first, and now a source at the federal level saying that Cesar Sayoc, 56 years old, as Catherine Herridge was telling us, known to authorities. Why is that component so important at this point?
Very important. And that information that the police had on him may have led them to him because he had to be in a data bank. He had to be somewhere in the police department's radar. So maybe in the past he was arrested for terrorist threats. Maybe in the past he had something to do with devices. But that's why it is very, very important component.
In fact, Catherine said that he did have a history of terroristic threats. How do you define that in general?
Well, see what he did with these bomb devices? That's terroristic threats. He could have had a history of doing things like this, arrested, maybe served some time. We'll find out a lot about him. And then, of course, released. But you define a person who commits terroristic threats, who commit acts of terror like this. And even a threat, a verbal threat, if a person believes that this individual is going to kill you or harm you, you charge him with terroristic threats. So he was on their radar.
And obviously the biggest concern right now would be, are there more devices out there? I mean, that would be the value of interviewing him immediately and trying to figure that out. What do you think are the odds of that, and how do we know for sure?
Well, we won't know for sure, but I'm sure we're going to know tomorrow or the next day, because if he did have more devices and he believed that the police were getting closer, he could have dumped in the mail right before the police arrived on the scene.
We have, and you know, we will be able to look at things before we can necessarily share them without attribution to our audience, but just from what we're knowing about him, his connections to the northern part of the East Coast is interesting, too, because of your background. We saw that NYPD jacket on the ground, so we knew that there were people from this area, this metro area, who had gone down. Would it necessarily be that he lived in New York to get that kind of, or is it because some of these packages went to New York?
Well, no, it could be. Look, he could have traveled to New York and traveled back to Florida. We just don't know. But the point is that the police are certainly going to ask those questions, and they're going to do a lot of investigating on his travels.
I'm going to put you on hold for a quick second because Catherine Herridge has some new information. We want to get it from her right away. Catherine.
Okay, so along with my colleague, producer Bill Mears, we've been able to confirm that there were 5 pen register warrants that were logged with the Southern District of Florida, and the date is yesterday. A pen register is an investigative device that allows the FBI to see exactly what numbers are coming from your telephones, whether it's a landline or whether it's a cell phone. So this helps them understand your web of contacts. It also helps them understand who you were in touch with at the time that the devices were mailed, so before and after. These were under seal, but we're told the pen registers were for Cesar Sayoc. And I want to draw your attention to the timing. This pen register information absolutely backs up what Rick Leventhal was saying earlier, which is that they had this suspect on their radar for at least 24 hours. But I can tell you from my own experience, you have to have sufficient evidence to show probable cause to get a pen register. So that takes us back as early as October 24th. So much earlier this week. Again, more evidence of how quickly this investigation was going. But they had 5 Penn Register warrants. They were sealed in the Southern District of New York, and we've confirmed they were for Cesar Sayoc, the suspect in the suspicious packages. The Penn Register allows federal investigators to see the numbers that are being called by an individual and received by an individual. So this goes to the effort to see whether this was a lone actor or whether other individuals were involved wittingly or unwittingly, Harris.
All right, we're going to go right away now to Miramar, Florida, as we've been watching this van on the back of that pickup truck head its way someplace. The FBI office in Miramar, Florida, is where we're told that they are taking that suspect van. Phil Keating is on the ground there. Phil?
Yeah, Harris, this is the spot, the headquarters of the FBI's Miami division, and we believe that the suspect is probably already inside, being processed, fingerprinted, perhaps read his Miranda rights, and further questioned on this investigation of certainly national interest. We're believing the convoy of about 5 or 6 unmarked SUVs belonging to the FBI, which is escorting the tow truck upon which is the suspect's van, which was put onto the flatbed tow truck in Plantation, which is really just 5 or 10 miles due north and northeast of us. And so right now, according to the helicopter aerials that we're seeing live on television, that caravan with the suspect's vehicle, which they've covered with that blue tarp. We did see aerials prior to them covering it with the blue tarp, just completely placard with what appears to be political propaganda all over it, including written out phrases for the drivers around him on the roads of traffic to read, not just pictures and little slogan bumper stickers. And on the dashboard, when they zoom in tight, you can see it is just covered with items. It's unclear what all that is, of course. Aventura PD, which is allegedly where the suspect resides, who used to live in New York, 56 years old, as we just heard. He was arrested apparently in Plantation. Perhaps he was driving around in his van, had been followed. All of this, the FBI and the Department of Justice will clear up at their 2:30 news conference from Washington, D.C., from DOJ headquarters. But within the next several minutes, we're expecting that big caravan. And, of course, everyone will be looking directly at the blue-covered tarp white van belonging to the alleged suspect here in this massive wave of 72 hours worth of domestic terrorism package mail bombs sent to facilities. It's been a very busy 48 hours here in South Florida, going back to Wednesday when one of these package bombs in a manila envelope arrived to Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz's office in Sunrise, which is just west of Plantation. We thought it was odd that all of the packages around the country sent to President Obama as well as President Bill and Hillary Clinton's house up there in New York all had a bogus return address of Debbie Wasserman Schultz's congressional office. Certainly was a signal to investigators.
Hi, Phil. I just want to stop you for a second here, because what we're watching on the side is they pulled over because the tarp has come off the van and has flown onto the side of the road, uncovering it. And so, everybody can see some of the things that are on the side of the van there, and stickers everywhere. Not a terribly subtle way if you're trying, you're a mail bomber, a pipe bomber who's trying not to get caught. Van is just covered with all kinds of, you would turn and look at that van no matter where you were, no matter what you were doing. They've now pulled over to the side of the road here, and they're trying to get the tarp back on, but we were talking about this idea of, it's not just obscuring what's on there, but it's trying to preserve what is essentially a crime scene. I don't know, Phil, your thoughts?
Evidence,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh,
well,
they got it back on.
We've all seen cars and trucks and vans like this around the country, covered with political or ideological or just issues that are important to them, basically turning their vehicle into a public billboard to drive around and influence others' minds. Of course, extremely rarely do those people then try to carry out some sort of act of domestic terrorism or any sort of crime, which is what this suspect is currently standing accused of. But they will soon be en route here back to that mail processing facility near the Opa-locka Airport in Miami-Dade County. That was where FBI agents and Miami-Dade police with their bomb teams and their dogs, they went in yesterday afternoon as a precautionary measure something certainly triggered federal investigators to suspect that perhaps some, if not all, of these packages had gone through that main South Florida facility where all outgoing mail from Broward County, Miami-Dade County, and Monroe County goes through it, processed, sorted, and then disseminated around the country, as well as all mail coming in from around the country goes through there. And it's believed that the package that arrived at Wasserman Schultz's office was that one addressed to Eric Holder, then returned to sender, so it went through that processing facility as well. But in last night's search, where they cleared the building, either the dog team or somebody visually noticed the package that looked very similar to all these other Pi bomb packages, and that's what the FBI confirmed, that 11th package here in South Florida this morning.
Wow, that's incredible detail. Phil is reporting for us in Miramar, Florida. That is where the van on the left of your screen live. And as Melissa pointed out at one point a few seconds ago, they had to pull over and put that tarp back on. The thing is covered with all sorts of stickers and whatnot. It's also a moving crime scene, as Catherine Herridge just talked about. So you got to protect it inside and out. And so they are beating the struggle of driving down the highway against a lot of wind to try to keep it covered up. And Phil, where you are, you're talking about the Aventura police and what we have learned about the suspect's connection to cities in South Florida as this van makes its way to the FBI headquarters for forensics. We'll lean on you for a little bit more detail. But before we do that, on the right side of your screen, top box above my head, is inside the White House. And the President of the United States is expected to make comments very shortly. He is at a youth leadership, black leadership group today that he's speaking with and has invited to the White House. And so that was a big event that was already on the calendar. But he's already tweeted out by himself that in the next couple of minutes that he'll be talking about what's happening with the bombing package investigation. So with Phil Keating on the ground, Phil, this van is pulling slowly now off the freeway.
I just want to point out to people, though, so you see human beings on the back of that van there.
Holding down that tarp.
They've climbed aboard. These are some of the forensic investigators. They've climbed aboard to try and hold that tarp on the back of the van because it did blow off. In case you're wondering why there are people sort of dangling off the back of the truck there, that's what's happened in that space.
Two things, too. I know our screen says Plantation, Florida. Plantation, Florida is not as large as it would appear, because now we are inching our way toward Miramar, Florida. And as soon as that van stops on the back of that tow truck, I think our graphic to the top of the left screen, oh, look, it just changed. Okay, Broward County. So we want to make sure we're right about this. Yeah. We have Steve Rogers sitting with us, too, Phil, and we want you to stand by because this thing is rolling towards you. Steve, with all of your forensics background, as Melissa just noted, you got now human beings that are trying to preserve this moving crime scene.
A couple of things to keep in mind. Absolutely right, the tarp is there to preserve evidence, but the one thing they don't want to have happen is people see those written things on the van and take pictures, and then you have the internet problems where people will formulate motives in their own mind. This is now going to be a factually evidence-based investigation, and let the police figure out what the motive was.
Well, so I think that cat may be out of the bag. Yeah, I mean, everybody's seen the side of the van.
I know, but we've learned in law enforcement that it's best to complete an investigation with all the facts before we start pointing fingers.
Yeah, just try not to make it worse.
That's
right.
Okay. Exactly right.
Okay, so Phil, we've adjusted the name on our screen. We're Broward County, and we are rolling. They have long left Plantation, rolling towards you in Miramar. What is facing on the other side, as far as you know?
Well, I can give you first some interesting background. WSVN, our Fox 7 News affiliate in South Florida, they are learning from Miami-Dade police sources, and they are now reporting this, that this suspect had been arrested in Miami-Dade County in the year 2002 for making a bomb threat, and again in 2012 or 2014 for allegedly shoplifting at a Walmart. And investigators did have his fingerprints from those incidents. Whether that was then used with all of the forensics that we suspect were all over these packages that did not explode at all of these homes of very prominent Democrats all over the country, it would seem very likely that they could easily match up those forensics if they were able to pull those off the packages, search the fingerprint databases nationally, get this name. in conjunction with that, all of the packages sent out and arrived on Wednesday and Thursday, and another one this morning, all had the Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the congresswoman from Broward County's address as the return address. That certainly was a clue at the beginning. Maybe we should check this U.S. Post Office sorting facility. Maybe these pieces of mail went through there.
Okay, Phil, thank you so much for that. Now, a couple minutes ago, we did see a piece of the van, and we were able to get a screen grab of it. So we want to show you how much we could see from there, and you could see how many stickers there are all over this van. I have no idea how you would even see out in order to be able to drive. A lot of those have to do with the president and the vice president, as you can see there. But every single window, I mean, if you're somebody who's trying to hide from authorities, I don't know that this is such a smart way to do it.
So Steve Rogers, of course, joining us. You know, it's interesting because that person had to have been aware that authorities were aware of them. I mean, so what Phil Keating just gave us is a history.
Yes.
A part of a criminal history that we can gain from our local Fox station, WSVN, down in Florida. And I saw you out of the corner of my eye nodding, saying, that's what I was talking about. What did you mean?
I was talking about the terroristic threat end of it when Melissa mentioned what is a terroristic threat, and Phil described it as a result of his prior arrest.
The 2002.
The 2002 arrest. So here they had in their data bank, they had the fingerprints. They had police reports. They had this guy on their radar, and amazingly, because of how quick they were able to do comparative analysis with regard to this guy, we have him now.
Yeah, and that 2004 actually was a shoplifting from a retail store, so it was separate from that 2002.
2014, I think, was that one.
Was it 2014? Okay. But it's interesting because you start to then pile on with your forensic evidence, even if the crimes aren't connected, even if they're not even similar to each other.
They're in the same report. They're in the same rap sheet, you know, so you're right. They don't have to be connected, but in effect, it's a totality of information about a suspect.
Okay. All right. So we can see the truck pulling in right here. This is Miramar, Florida, and this is where our reporter is on the ground. So he is seeing, this is the vantage point that you're seeing as this truck arrives and they begin to do analysis on it. Steve, you know, what are the very first things that they're going to do?
Well, they're going to take pictures of everything. That's the first thing. They always take photographs. Secondly, they'll be looking for physical evidence that they could see with the human eye, and then they'll bring forensic teams in to look at even for microscopic evidence. You're looking for DNA. You're looking for fingerprints. You're even looking for a strand of hair. Believe me, it gets drilled down that far. However, keep in mind, they also are going to be looking for the possibility of maybe somebody else's fingerprints or something.
Steve, I'm going to ask you just to stand by for 1 second because Phil Keating can see this as it's happening. Phil?
Yeah, this is 5 lanes away from us right now here, and you can see that massive convoy of federal law enforcement agents, and you can see very clearly the agents there on top of the flatbed tow truck on the backside and in the front, keeping that blue tarp down. It's now entering the very secure gate of the FBI's Miami Division headquarters, following the route for deliveries, and it will be processed and held here for all evidence that federal agents can glean. Cesar Sayoc is the suspect that has been named now as the suspect in these package pipe bombs, and that is the vehicle that was taken into custody, as well as him in Plantation earlier today.
All right,
back to you.
Phil Keating, we're going to break for the president inside the White House. He is at a youth black conference, leadership conference, but expected, according to his own Twitter feed, to begin with comments about the suspicious packages investigation. Let's watch.
Thank you very much. What a group. What a group. Thank you very much. What a great honor to have you. Thank you. It is a great, great honor to have you in the White House. Thank you very much. They call this, as you know, this is Young Black Leadership, and it's the summit. And to have you here is truly my privilege. And we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to talk. We're going to meet. But before I do, I'd like to begin
and you are leaders. You're real leaders. I'd like to begin today's remarks by providing an update on the packages and devices that have been mailed to high-profile figures throughout our country and a media organization. I am pleased to inform you that law enforcement has apprehended the suspect and taken him into custody. It's an incredible job by law enforcement. We've carried out a far-reaching federal, state, and local investigation to find the person or persons responsible for these events. These terrorizing acts are despicable and have no place in our country. No place. I've instructed authorities to spare no resource or expense in finding those responsible and bringing them to swift and certain justice. And we will prosecute them, him, her, whoever it may be, to the fullest extent of the law. We must never allow political violence to take root in America. Cannot let it happen. And I'm committed to doing everything in my power as president to stop it. And to stop it now. To stop it now. I have just concluded a briefing with the Department of Justice following the apprehension of the suspect. I want to applaud the FBI, Secret Service, the Department of Justice, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, the NYPD, and all law enforcement throughout the entire country, incredible partners. These people have worked so hard, and to have done it so quickly, it's looking like it's a needle in a haystack. How do you do this so quickly? They've done an incredible, incredible job, and I want to congratulate them. But the bottom line is that Americans must unify, and we must show the world that we are united together in peace and love and harmony as fellow American citizens. There is no country like our country, and every day we are showing the world just how truly great we are. So you are really very special people. I wanted to say that before our little talk. And I appreciate the time you've given me. And, boy, one day, one of you is going to be standing. It could be 3 or 4 of you, actually. But you're going to be standing right here. You're going to be standing right here. I have no doubt. I have no doubt. Who in this room wants to be president someday? So it's an ambitious group. It's an ambitious group. That's great. Anyway, thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. For the media, thank you very much. I thought I'd do that, and we feel very strongly. Again, congratulations to all law enforcement. We have the best in the world, and they just showed it. Thank you very much. Now to the subject at hand. And it is my great honor to be with so many brilliant, and that's what you are, brilliant, courageous, patriotic, and proud Americans. Seeing all of you here today fills me with an extraordinary confidence in America's future and the great, great future of our country. Each of you is taking part in the Young Black Leadership Summit, because you are true leaders on your campuses, in your churches, and in your communities. You are leaders. Leaders of the future. You're leaders of the present also. Remember that. You're leaders of youth.
The President of the United States with the 2018 Young Black Leadership Summit inside the East Room at the White House, asking them who wants to be president. Cheers there, but the cheers first came when he announced that there had been arrest and an individual taken into custody in the bomb scare series that we have been terrorized with in the United States over the past couple of days. At one point, he said, "I'm pleased to tell you that a suspect has been arrested and taken into custody. We will prosecute them, him or her, whoever it may be, to the fullest extent of the law." And then he made a plea for togetherness. He said, we must show the world that we are united as American citizens. The president at the White House in the East Room, the 2018 Young Black Leadership Summit, he began with those comments, as he promised that he would, in a tweet about 30 minutes ago on the investigation. And this scene is unfolding. Look at what's happening on the left side of your screen. That truck that has struggled mightily to keep its tarp on the evidence that that tow truck is carrying on the back has now arrived at FBI headquarters in Miramar, Florida, where they will commence immediately with forensic investigation. And as our guest alongside here on Outnumbered today, Steve Rogers, has pointed out, that will begin with taking pictures. There have already been some pictures taken of that suspect's van that they have taken off the premises of where he lived in South Florida. Steve, we've seen some of those stickers and things, but it's also the totality of that crime scene, the inside as well, that they will look at now at FBI headquarters. This is not Quantico. What is it in Miramar, and what are they capable of?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that the FBI headquarters in Miramar has the equipment they need in order to collect DNA, in order to get even microscopic evidence. And keep in mind that as they go through that van and they start analyzing fingerprints and other evidence, the question is somebody else's fingerprints in there?
Right.
You see, so this is why it's important to take those pictures and to secure that crime scene.
That's what I was going to ask. Is that question number one? I mean, is that the top priority as you come in? Is there somebody else out there?
Well, exactly right. And they're probably going to do a lot more, as was reported earlier by your reporter. I think it was Catherine on the phones. Yeah. Who was this person calling? At what time were they calling? That doesn't mean the person they were calling is involved. But a lot of these guys, you know, they start making phone calls to their friends saying, look what I'm going to do, watch TV, because we're dealing with someone very unstable.
Or in this sense, since he was already on their radar and obviously was driving around in something that was so decorated you could pick it out probably in the dark, he may have been, you know, having conversations more about what are you seeing? I mean, sometimes we'll see that with criminals, too. You know, what are you seeing on the outside? How worried should I be? Dagan, I know that you've been keeping close eye on social media and other aspects of this.
Right. You have to be careful about what you read and see on social media.
Right.
But the pictures that we are seeing in terms of when the tarp flew off the van, we could all see the conspiracy stickers and information that's covered in the van. But the speed with which they apprehended the suspect is really astonishing. Yes. To quote Catherine Herridge, what she's been saying earlier, the wealth of forensic evidence that they had because of these 12 devices, some of which were not even sent down to Quantico in Virginia because they were unstable and detonated before they were sent. But in terms of, they had already reached out to retailers, locating where the pipes had come from, where the explosive powder, the actual manila envelopes that the devices were sent into all of these individuals. And then the fact this man had a lengthy arrest record based on our reporting and other reports out there. Yeah. Not just in recent history, but according to the New York Times, going back to 1991 is how far back his arrest record.
Well, and you know, Dagan, as you look at that the one that kind of burst, if you will, for a Fox affiliate, SVN, down in Florida was that 2002 arrest, because it was specific to the topic of what we're looking at now, and that was a bomb threat. Right. So we know that he was on their radar, but specific to what we were seeing and charges that may be pending against him at this point, there was that history.
And driving around in a vehicle parked in a shopping center where he was apprehended for days and days, that drew attention to you.
That's what boggles my mind.
It was so conspicuous that just alone people would stop and look in the van, according to some of the reports out there.
And I was really pleased to see the president and hear the president talk about the fact that there is absolutely no place in our country for this kind of thing, and that we need to come together as a country, because we've really seen too much of this in the country. Now you have prominent leaders on the left receiving possibly explosive packages. You have Republicans being, gunned down at a baseball event in the name of health care. We've had Republicans during the Kavanaugh hearing having to have protection because of the death threats against them, because we cannot live in a country where if you're serving in a position of leadership, this is what you're on the receiving end of. So I think this is where the conversation needs to stay as the country, from the president to politicians on down.
And to Lisa's point, if I may, the best of America we saw, the best of law enforcement, and the President of the United States set that tone, to your point, Lisa, perfectly. We all came together. No matter what our political ideology is or political party is, Americans came together and they got the culprit.
I wonder if that'll last.
One thing that the president said, too, just in the context of that, was that let the world see us together as American citizens. Because when this happens, we all know our hearts stopped when we saw people spilling out of Time Warner in evacuation mode, the CNN headquarters, a couple days ago, onto the streets of Manhattan, 58th Street and Columbus Circle there. It's jarring. It's jarring. And the whole world watches us in this metro recoil and be, you know, resilient. And they watch us go through these. But then these devices started showing up in other parts, all the way to the other coast. And so it is the world watching. It's very interesting that he would.
It reminds me of what Ronald Reagan once said, we bounce back because we're Americans.
Steve, can I ask you to look at the screen real quick, and maybe you can look and describe some of the things that you're seeing here? I mean, it looks like possibly of someone taking pictures, but they're coming out. We get a closer look to kind of see how they are approaching this vehicle. We had thought that they were going to back it into a closed area so we wouldn't be able to watch it. But can you see any of the things that are going on over there?
Yeah, they're obviously they are taking pictures, but they're going to look at the undercarriage. They're going to be looking to make sure that as they move that vehicle, they don't touch even the outer parts of that vehicle. There may be fingerprints on the doors, on the hoods, on the trunk. So they're just being very, very careful.
Would they already know that there's no explosive devices, or it isn't
I'm
in
sure
any
they
way
do.
at this point why
they wouldn't have pulled it.
Yeah, they wouldn't have had that added. I'm sure they had dogs. They had some forensic teams go in there to make sure there's no explosive devices.
I mean, they couldn't even keep the tarp on. So I think that if they thought that there was some device under there, that would be even more disruptive.
Can I ask you another detail that we heard earlier today? They were talking about the print that was on the notes that went along or on the outside of the packages and the block printing, and saying that within that block printing there are actually numbers that are hidden in there in that specific kind of print so that they can do some sort of tracing back to what type of printer or what printer it was. Do you know about that?
I do know that there are certain printing outfits that do have hidden numbers, all right?
Yeah.
And it's actually used to, if there's a product recall, all right? They're like product recall numbers. So they were able to capture that, and they were probably able to lead back to who printed this paper and what retail outfits do they sell this paper to.
Right.
So that's how efficient they were.
Interesting.
Yeah. You know, okay, so as Melissa had pointed out, they at one point were backing this vehicle into that location, and then they pulled it back out. We can't see as much of that vehicle as we had been able to in the freeway because the wind isn't helping us out in terms of blowing back that tarp. But what else do you...
Well, picture a hospital room, right? Clean as a whistle, no germs. That's where that vehicle's going. That's going into a very clean, secure environment where there's going to be no way that any evidence is going to be contaminated. And that is very, very important.
What's happening? I was just going to say, given the condition of this van, based on what when the tarp flew back, you could see what was on the dashboard of it.
Oh, right.
In terms of the time it will take to process this vehicle, it's going to take quite a bit of time for law enforcement to take care of that.
So, Steve, let's, if we can, and of course we'll keep this on the screen because we didn't anticipate we'd see this much of the first work of investigation here. But we're grateful to see them begin this. I want to concentrate, though, on the human element in all of this, that somebody had been driving around in that van, and we think that that person has been arrested and taken into custody because this was taken off his premises, and that's what we've been told. What's happening with that suspect right now?
Criminal psychological profilers will be interviewing him, as well as the criminal element investigators. They want to... they're going to want to figure out why he did that. Why were you riding around in the open? Did you want to get caught? What is very interesting is the fact that none of these devices exploded. They're going to try to get into his psyche. What was your purpose? What did you actually try to gain from this? So, yeah, he's going to be interviewed by obviously the ground investigators, but also very important those who could look into his psyche. That's very, very important.
How long does that process take?
Well, it could take hours, many, many hours. They're going to try to befriend him. They're going to, the one thing investigators will do is try to befriend the suspect, get him to talk, get him to maybe talk about his past and a little bit of a history of the environment that they lived in, etc. And then they begin to talk. And he may begin to turn over a lot of information with regard to who he was in contact with, which will lead them to others. But that's what they're going to do. It may take a few hours. It could take 8 hours, 9 hours. But I think that it's going to be done pretty quickly. Something tells me that this guy knew he was going to get caught and maybe at one point wanted to get caught.
I thought it was interesting what Catherine Herridge was saying earlier when she was talking about the algorithms that are used at this point in time. And this is really, I mean, it goes back to that whole thing that you don't do anything without, you know, people knowing where you are and what you're doing, like sort of organizing where the packages were sent from based on the stamp, and then how long it took for them to get to each place, and if they were mailed at similar times, and kind of fanning out from there on where things were bought, that you begin with the help of algorithms to triangulate back and forth until you find somebody who could have achieved all of the different markers
and Melissa,
that they can find.
To your point, don't be surprised if people start coming forward and say, you know, I saw him going to the post office the other day, or I saw him buying this, or there was something on social media that I saw. I was in a chat room. So most of the time you will see people come forward now and say, I saw something, I should have said something.
Well, just like with one of the packages.
Right,
the one at De Niro's place, that the mailroom, that the person who was working there, the doorman, mailroom crew realized that, wait, didn't I see something a couple of days ago? And that package had been sitting. I'm sorry, Dave.
No, one of the first things you would do, though, is run looking for people who had arrested prior for making bomb threats. And this individual, based on our reporting so far, had been arrested at least one point for making a terroristic threat based on a bomb. And so that's the speed with which, again, the speed with which this suspect was identified and taken into custody is kind of astonishing, because if you think back to like the anthrax-laced letters that were sent back in 2001, it took years. The FBI hounded an innocent man for years, and eventually it was in 2008 that the individual who was responsible committed suicide. So this is a matter of days that they were able to arrest this individual.
Well, with the bombs themselves, and we learned this morning out of all of them, and this was before the 11th and 12th had been looked at as closely as well, but at the crack of dawn, 9 of them had been confirmed to be explosive devices. You know, a lot of times what you'll have is a fake device, or you talk about them not blowing up, but they were clearly capable of something, because we've learned from Catherine Herridge's reporting and others that they were unstable and they were dangerous and needed to be blown up and not transferred right away intact to Quantico. So you mentioned, Steve, what was first. What is next in all of this? Because it doesn't, I mean, they're taking their pictures, they're sticking stuff up under the van to take pictures, and we don't know how much of this is going to unfold in front of us, so it's very valuable to get your perspective on what they're doing.
Well, the next is going to be obviously the interview, and if there's anybody else involved, he will lead them to.
But I mean, for this van that's now
for
moving.
this van. Oh, they're going to bring it in there. They're going to remove the tarp, and they will take more pictures inside. They're going to take pictures, as Dagan said, what's on that dashboard. They're going to take pictures up and down and all
Look at
around.
the screen right now. They are moving it. And they've moved it away from that opening that they were going to take it in. So maybe they're taking it elsewhere, as you say, Steve.
And the photographs are important because they want to make sure that, especially when they go to prosecution, that they could say, or they could place a particular piece of evidence in that van at that time. And then the collection of evidence from the forensics teams is very important. And it all might be right there what they need. They may find fragments of different bomb-making devices in that van. So actually, it looks like they're going to actually take it off the van, and they may just.
You're watching this on?
Yeah, they may just push it into the garage. Maybe they couldn't get that truck in the garage.
Oh, maybe that was a problem. I mean, we don't know what caused them to come back out and to take their pictures right away outside in the open daylight.
Yeah.
But they had tried initially, Steve, your observation, it's
Yeah.
very strong. I get it. It may have been a height situation, because now they are lifting that van off of that tow truck bed.
Yeah.
And perhaps, as you say...
and you can see right there's another new image of the side of the van. And during that period of time when the tarp came off, and you can see, if you look closely, a lot of the stickers, we're trying to, this monitor doesn't work, but we can see over here. So that
we don't want to miss them rolling the van.
See what's on there.
Yeah. My guess is, Harris, you're right. They couldn't fit the van with that.
The height, because you never saw it, like, breach the doorway much,
There we
right?
go.
So... Wow, look at how much information now there is. Now, we did have SVN, our Fox affiliate, WSVN, who was following along from the air. And so we had a different vantage point of images because now that's back where the van was originally parked, because I remember that pole is in those original pictures. But as we look away from that, you know, we got some interesting points of view from the air. And they have a zoom lens up there, too. It's fascinating. But if we go back right now to the live pictures, because we don't want to miss them backing this off of the tow truck bed to see where they're going to take it now, if they're actually going to push it into that garage. We'll wait for them to go back to the live pictures. And again, that is Miramar, Florida, where they are backing. So they're lifting that van up. This is complicated, too, Steve, because I don't think you necessarily want to turn the engine on.
Well, no, you don't.
You don't want to disturb any of the evidence.
Exactly. And the important element here now is preservation of evidence. They want to make sure that nothing on that van, especially the outer surfaces, they want to make sure that's protected. So they're being very, very careful. And my guess is they're going to push that van into the garage and then close the garage door, because the preservation of evidence is key, not only to prosecution, but is key to further the investigation if they have to. It may lead them to some other suspects if there are some.
Is it odd for him to be so overt with these stickers on the truck, or is this something that you've seen before, or the van rather?
Seen things before during my law enforcement career. These people are unstable. They're really unstable, believe me,
Yeah.
Lisa. And but in this case, you know, it may lead to something, some part of the investigation, maybe not. But what's important is the preservation of all of that. Look, he may have written on some of those stickers that are in the window, and that may be very important.
This van was so conspicuous.
Okay, so I want to tell you what you're seeing on the side of your screen there as they're moving. They're going over there to the auto zone. There we go. This is where the suspect was arrested earlier. It is in Plantation, Florida. And I guess it looks like we're looking through the window inside of the store, and you can see there some FBI officials inside doing work wearing their jacket. But this is where they actually found the suspect and where they found this van. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just going to say that this van was so conspicuous and, quite frankly, stood out so prominently that people in South Florida around the suspect, Cesar Sayoc, lived in Aventura, which is kind of southeast of Plantation where he was arrested. But the people in past days and weeks had taken photos of this van and were posting them on social media earlier, saying this van was so absurd and covered in all this propaganda that they had taken photos of it prior. So that's how conspicuous he was, and that's how he was clearly not trying to hide.
Yeah, Steve, what were you going to say there?
What do you think of that? See something, say something. And Dagan, that's great. And that's the point that the law enforcement brings to people. Your gut feeling says there's something wrong. These people felt there was something wrong. They took pictures, they posted it, and look what we have.
Yeah, you know, as we look at the different parts of this and community working together, law enforcement working together, I go back to what Lisa was just asking. You're driving around in something that is a billboard.
Right.
So was the goal really to get caught? We don't know. You mentioned the criminal psychological investigators who will be interviewing him for hours. That will be a very intriguing scoop of information because, again, you couldn't even drive around at night much with something this.
I don't know how you can see out.
Oh, well, look, he could have been driving around saying, hey, guys, here I am. It's me. I mean, this is the type of people we're dealing with. So, yes, very conspicuous. But you know what? The fact of the matter is that all becomes part of evidence.
Can I say, though, we don't yet know who that van is registered to? We're making the, we're making the assumption
I said it was taken from the premises of the home that we knew where he lived, and we've been told that that was a van that the suspect owned. But no, we haven't had a chance to run a DMV or anything. We didn't have enough information, only his name in the last hour or so. Clearly, there's a lot of information on the outside of that van, and when it was parked, if you go back to that picture where it has a pole in it, earlier on when people were snapping it and putting it all over Twitter from their TV sets, you could see even more information. So there probably is a way to find it through the DMV, I would imagine at this point. But it is the human intelligence that has made such a huge impact as we can see that auto zone in Plantation, Florida?
Well, that goes back to what we call the original, how investigators originally did their investigations. A lot of footwork, a lot of human intelligence, as you say. Excuse me, a lot of interviews. You can have a lot of video footage, you can have a lot of forensic evidence, but there's nothing like a human being saying, hey, you know what? That person was in this store, and yes, they bought this. Oh, sorry, they bought this, they bought that. They drove here in that van.
Steve, can I
saw them
ask you a quick question before we run out of time? So you have a van that looks like that, and let's say that it is his. How do you start an interview? Like, how does that change the way you approach someone if that's what they're driving around in while they're, in theory, trying to, get away with this crime?
Well, what I would do is say to the suspect right off, look, we have you, we have your van, we have everything that's in the van that's now becoming part of evidence. Why lie? Tell the truth. And believe it or not, they figure they're caught. Why not just tell the truth? That's what you do. You come right forward, and that's the way you put it.
And Steve, how much, obviously we live in a 24-hour news cycle, how much information will the public find out, do you think, in the next 24 hours or so?
Well, you're going to find out information that will not compromise this investigation because it's ongoing. We don't know if there's anyone else involved, but regardless, excellent police work.
Well, what information we do have is a very lengthy arrest record based on going back to at least 1991 for a variety of different crimes in South Florida. And there's also a report that there was a bankruptcy filing about 6 years ago, and the filing says that this individual lived with his mother. And people who had seen this van around Aventura, Florida, when the doors of the van would be open, the presumption was that the individual was living in the van, at least part of the time.
And there's a phrase that we use in law enforcement, we don't know what we don't know. That's why you have to go after to find out what you need to know.
And to build a case.
And to build a case.
What do they need to know right now?
Well, they need to know right now immediately. I mean, they have him in enough evidence. Was there anyone else involved? Did anyone else have information? Who were you talking to on the telephone during the period of time that this was going on? That is absolutely important, and it may lead police to either more suspects or to a dead end, and he would be the only person involved in this.
And I wouldn't be surprised if we learned that there were other people who tipped off the police. I mean, you talk about looking at what numbers were going out and coming in and out of his phone. We don't know that there weren't, at this point, other people who were calling in and saying, hey, the van, the person, or I know this guy.
Yes, you're right. That's why we'll get limited information from law enforcement, because right now it's an ongoing investigation, and the thing they do not want to do is compromise the investigation at this point.
Right. You know, one of the questions, too, I would imagine when you talk about are there other people involved, are there any other devices?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, because you don't want somebody else carrying out whatever the bent vision was.
Well, that's right, and hopefully there are none. And at this point, we'll find out.
All right, we have live team Fox coverage and analysis coming right up. Stay with us. Fox News Alert. This is Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. Our reporter, Catherine Herridge, is live for us in Washington with how federal investigators narrowed their manhunt. And now the man police have arrested is on the center of your screen. That is 56-year-old Cesar Sayoc. We have been talking about him for the better part of an hour. They took a van from his premises where they know that he lived, and we have been watching that arrive at the Miramar, Florida FBI headquarters. On the ground outside of that is Phil Keating at the scene in South Florida. So, Phil, two parts of the story now. We see the face of the man suspected in carrying out the bomb scares that the nation has experienced for days, and we see the arrival of a van we believe belonged to him arriving at FBI headquarters.
And that van remains behind me in the complex here, highly secured gated complex of the FBI's Miami Division headquarters. We just had about a dozen bicycle cops on Harley Davidsons escorting about 5 cars inside the gates there. The cops on the bikes coming in at a high rate of speed, lights and sirens going, escorting these 5 cars. We don't know who was in that, but we have to assume that must be related to this case. And we believe the suspect is inside the building and has been for at least an hour being processed after he was arrested in Plantation. His address has been listed as Aventura, which is just north of North Miami Beach and just south of Fort Lauderdale. This is the western side of Broward County, Miramar, where the FBI headquarters is. And just several miles from here is Plantation. And by the aerials of the news choppers, as you can see his white van, the suspect's white van, being taken into custody after the suspect was apprehended, it appears that the FBI knew who they were wanting to arrest and were basically following him to do some personal business where he would not suspect undercover agents might suddenly jump out of the car when he pulls in to conduct some business or go buy something, and that's where it appears they made the arrest. They then brought the van on a flatbed tow truck, covered it with a blue tarp simply because it is covered with reams of bumper sticker evidence. There are all kinds of political messages on that van. There's things that are written out for other drivers to read as this driver would parade that car to and fro on surface streets and highways. A lot of cars do that around the country. A lot of drivers do that because they're so passionate about what they believe in and they hope to influence others. But of course, almost never do they do any kind of act of domestic terror, as this man is suspected of doing. So the van will be processed here for days, if not weeks to come here, probably held there for a very long time. They'll be gathering everything out. And based on our sources at WSVN, a Miami station, a colleague of mine there, a reporter, he's confirmed with Miami-Dade PD that back in 2002, this same man was arrested for making a bomb threat, and also in 2014 for shoplifting at a Walmart, and that law enforcement had his fingerprints in their national database. And if they were able to, as we assume, get a whole lot of forensic evidence from all of these pipe bomb packages that never exploded, they were able to perhaps match him up. And then, of course, there's the South Florida U.S. Postal Service sorting facility where at least 2 of these package bombs, if not more, went through as they were then sent around the country, including one discovered last night or in the early hours this morning after Miami-Dade Police Department's bomb squad in conjunction with the FBI went into that sorting facility, which is an enormous place. Gathers all incoming mail going to destinations in South Florida and all outgoing South Florida mail, and then sorted and then sent out around the country and around the world. They said last night they were just doing this as a precautionary move. They had their bomb-sniffing dog in there. They had dozens and dozens of officers and agents, and we're not sure whether it was a visual connection or whether it was the dog keying on this package, but they spotted what appeared to be a very similar yellow manila envelope with that same Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz Sunrise, Florida office as the return address. And this one they found and confirmed this morning as the 11th pipe bomb package that was destined for U.S. Senator Cory Booker, Democrat from New Jersey. Not sure if that was destined for his D.C. office or his home, but that was how the morning began here in a busy South Florida day.
Phil, you're giving us great information, and I want to also aid people who are just tuning in. The man on the left side of your screen is the suspect in the series of bomb packages that have arrived in mail centers, as Phil was just talking about, routed to, not arriving at the homes of, not arriving at necessarily their destinations, but we're targeting high-profile Democrats and some donors and proponents of the politics on the left. Robert De Niro, an actor, you know the names that have been on there, but most importantly, 2 former presidents and a vice president, President Obama, President Clinton, and Vice President Joe Biden. So that has been the terror that has been feathering out across the country, from California to Connecticut to New York to Florida to D.C. for the last few days. And now you see Phil Keating at the epicenter of what has come together today. The arrest of this man on your screen, Cesar Sayoc, 56 years old, in South Florida. We're told he was from Aventura, Florida, which is a little ways out of Plantation, Florida, which is where you've been seeing a lot of the activity with authorities today. And also away from that in Miramar, Florida, we saw them take a van from the location where the man on the left side of your screen lived and take it to FBI headquarters for forensics investigation in Miramar, Florida. So Phil Keating has been on the ground and has been there for all of this. Phil, we thank you so very much for all the detail. We want to now bring in Catherine Herridge, who's been following this from D.C. And Catherine, there had been a quieting, if you will, from authorities the last 24 hours or so. And now from Phil, we have learned that they were watching this man and they were following him and they were wanting to see where he would go and what he would do.
Well, Harris, there's more evidence that really backs up that timeline. We were able to confirm earlier today that there are 5 sealed warrants in the Southern District of New York, and they were logged yesterday by the feds. They would require probable cause, so evidence of a potential crime, and we're told that they are pen registers as well as track and trace for the suspect, Cesar Sayoc. A pen register allows federal authorities to capture and identify the numbers that are being called from a suspect's landline or their cell phones, even their computer activity. But even more importantly, on the track and trace, it allows them to go to different geographic locations. So this information would allow them to see whether the telephone tracking data lines up with what they think was the series of events when the packages were mailed and from where they were mailed in Florida. Also from our reporting of Rick Leventhal earlier that this was someone who was known to federal law enforcement authorities. Phil mentioned some additional details now, but specifically on this issue of making terroristic threats in the past. A terroristic threat is a threat to commit an act of violence against an individual's, a group, or property. And there's also a provision in the law that describes using it for political reasons to influence a branch of government as well. Now, in terms of the forensic piece, what we've known really from the outset is that there was a wealth of forensic evidence because many of these devices, in fact, all of the devices, failed to detonate. So we knew that it had advanced to the point, Harrison reported this morning, that the FBI was actively reaching out to retailers to determine the point of origin and purchase for some of the elements of these packages. So things like the manila envelopes, the pipes, the explosive powder, the black plastic electrician's tape that can be seen around the pipe bombs. So they were sort of getting their ducks in a row, getting the final details together to help sort of fill out this mosaic of what they think were the actions of this suspect, 56-year-old Cesar Sayoc in Florida, Harris.
You know, it's interesting because when we have talked with forensics experts, we had a guest on with us, Steve Rogers, on Outnumbered. One of the big questions was this man was driving around in something that would have been easily identifiable. And now we are learning that authorities not only knew of him, but they knew of him making bomb threats back in 2002. So you talk about forensic evidence, and then there was also just historical evidence. Catherine, before I go back to you, I just want everybody to know you are looking at a scene, though, on the left side of your screen of his van. We think it's a suspect's van. That's what we've been told. Was taken from his premises to the FBI headquarters. This is video from earlier. What our viewers got to see was something that we were not anticipating, and that was them starting their investigation with those important pictures that they were taking of the undercarriage of the van and doing so much in the daylight. They then offloaded this van, and we were able to watch this live. And if we have those pictures, we can show you those too. As they were trying to put it in that very sterile environment where they would take a look at it in a big garage in Miramar, Florida. We were guessing, based on what we could see, and we had an expert with us, Catherine, that they needed to do that because they couldn't get the van on this trolley bed into that garage. So I just want everybody to know this is video from earlier. There you go. Now that's actually arrival there and where they were starting to take the pictures. So, Catherine, they had so much to work with in terms of this individual suspect before they even got to the physical evidence that you were talking about.
Well, really, that van is being treated like crime scene evidence. If you imagine a murder scene and you find a bloody knife on the floor, what they do is that they contain it and then they tag it and they number it and they begin the process of what they call the chain of custody process, and that has to be all in line for any kind of prosecution. So really the van of the suspect is like a giant piece of evidence, and they're trying to contain it and tag it and log it into the system as chain of evidence. And I don't want to be speculating for people, but from my experience, when they're taking photographs on the underbelly of the vehicle, they're also doing that for safety reasons, because they have to anticipate that anything associated with the suspect may be rigged to blow, right? You have to always be considering that. So it's a safety precaution, perhaps more than anything else.
Yeah, what we were talking about with our specialists, our anti-terrorism specialist, Steve Rogers, is that it was his thinking they never would have put that truck in traffic on a flatbed if they hadn't already done some of that before they loaded it up.
That's
so
right.
They may have been taking further pictures, but he felt assured that they wouldn't have driven it into traffic. But your point is well taken for a stationary vehicle. Catherine, we will come back to you as the news warrants. I want to bring in now Republican Congressman Pete King of the House Homeland Security Committee. Congressman, when you and I spoke less than 36 hours ago, the situation was so different than what it is now. You saw the president that we showed everybody at the White House jubilant over the fact that they have made an arrest. There is a person in custody, and whomever it was, he said him, her, them, he said they will face the full extent of the law. Your reaction today?
First of all, we have to give tremendous credit to law enforcement at every level, certainly the NYPD here in New York, the FBI, who did a phenomenal job on this. You know, after the fact, it all looks very easy. You see prior arrests, you see me as a truck that looks like it's, you know, very politically active, and it all comes together. But to get those pieces is very, very difficult, and I really give them tremendous credit for doing it and wrapping this up so quickly. Even though no one has been hurt so far, and we hope there's no more bombs out there, the fact is this was dividing the country. It was causing fear and not panic, but certainly fear, and it was an attempt to terrorize. So the fact that the FBI and local law enforcement were able to wrap this up is really a tremendous tribute.
You know, another occasion that we have spoken is when there was, you know, problem with a bomb in Times Square, and you had the bombing packages in Austin, Texas. I mean, we have seen this happen, and you talk about the law enforcement and them pulling together, but it also takes a public that is brave and aware. And as you're hearing the details in this particular arrest, it seems like we're learning some things along the way for the public and their awareness, our awareness.
Yeah, as a New Yorker in particular, I was very proud, like, for instance, after the first a bomb was found at CNN and other places in Manhattan, down at Tribeca, how people didn't panic. They just followed the directions of the police. They stayed away. They looked casually as they went by. There was no sense of panic, people running and hiding at all. And that, to me, is really the best of America. It's what we showed after 9/11, and it's what we're showing now. So I think it shows how the country has always been strong, and it's even been stronger since we've had this terrorist threat at home. Terrorists you know, coming from all directions, and yet we don't lose our composure, we don't panic, and the fact that we do have this faith in the law enforcement, and sometimes we take them for granted, but when the crisis comes, we realize we can really count on them.
You know, Congressman, as we look forward beyond this event, as we learn so much more from this and then anticipate getting ready for whatever could come. I mean, of course, prayerfully, we think that it could never happen, but we do know that we need to be prepared. What would you say that you noticed about the level of coordination? And let me just give you one example. You know, we had people in the newsroom today, one picked out, oh, that's an NYPD jacket that we see there among all those people on the premises of where we think the suspect lived.
Yeah, there was tremendous coordination between federal, state, and local, interstate, NYPD. They have an outstanding bomb squad. The fact is, apparently, this person originally was in New York, or at least there's been reports of that. But again, they are tied in nationally and internationally. In many ways, the NYPD almost has like its own FBI and CIA. They do a phenomenal job. and then you have the FBI, which is now so much more coordinated with local police than it may have been, for instance, before 9/11. All that has improved so dramatically over the years. The police in Florida, who are on top of this, how quickly they were able to move. And again, the coordination, it seems as if there were no turf battles going on here. Everyone was working together. They realized that the greater good was to pool all the evidence, get it analyzed, and move as quickly as possible. So, no, that was very reassuring. And when you're dealing with Homeland Security and you look at the overall defensive maps of the country, to see that it worked. Here we were, really, literally under the gun, and everything worked. And that is so reassuring.
Congressman Peter King of the great state of New York, thank you so very much for your time this week. You and I have seen each other a couple of times navigating through this, because this originated in the state of New York and then spread to California, Florida, and other places. Congressman, thank you.
Thank you, Harris, as always. Thank you very much.
All right, so just above my head, as you see on your screen, is 56-year-old Cesar Sayoc. He is the man police say that they have arrested. Federal authorities say that they are now in interviewing with him. We know from experts in the last hour, criminal psychological investigators will likely spend hours with Cesar Sayoc to find out if this suspect is the man who did all of this, and if so, why did he do it? More reaction to this major arrest from President Trump. We'll hear it from him straight ahead. Also, Congressman Darrell Issa of California, a member of the House Judiciary Committee, to give his take on the DOJ investigation. We expect to hear from the Justice Department, an update from Attorney General Jeff Sessions coming up within the next hour at the Justice Department. More information on this breaking news. Stay close.
This